43 seconds. That's how long it took for a collapsing dam to erase an entire city of 230,000 people from existence. And you've never seen the footage because governments around the world agreed to bury it. They showed you the Twin Towers falling. They showed you the Titanic sinking. They showed you Chernobyl burning. But there are disasters so catastrophic, so damning, so revealing of government and corporate negligence that the footage was seized, classified, or destroyed. Disasters where the death toll was so high that admitting it would topple governments, where the evidence of criminality was so clear that releasing it would spark revolutions. What I'm about to show you isn't terrorist attacks or natural disasters. These are 5 man-made catastrophes caused by pure negligence, deliberate corner-cutting, and calculated decisions that human lives were expendable. Disasters where officials knew, sometimes for years, that catastrophe was inevitable. And when it happened, they didn't rush to save people. They rushed to hide the evidence. In one case, a government deliberately drowned hundreds of thousands of its own citizens to save a weapons facility. In another, a single miscalculation by a hungover engineer killed more people in 3 minutes than died in the entire Vietnam War. In another, corporate executives literally watched people burn to death on security cameras and chose profit over rescue. The footage exists. Grainy security camera recordings, amateur videos smuggled out by survivors. Satellite imagery that governments tried to suppress. Dashcam videos from moments before impact. I'm going to show you what they didn't want you to see and explain exactly why they buried it. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these disasters aren't taught in schools, why Wikipedia pages about them keep getting deleted, and why families of victims are still fighting in court decades later just to get their governments to admit these events even happened. But first, we need to talk about what happened in China in 1975, when the deadliest disaster in human history was erased from existence. August 7, 1975. The Banqiao Reservoir in China's Henan province sat peacefully behind one of the largest dams in the world. The dam was a monument to communist achievement, built during Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward to control flooding and generate hydroelectric power. It was considered indestructible. Chinese officials called it the Iron Dam. Engineers boasted it could withstand a 1 in 1,000-year flood. Behind this dam sat 700 million cubic meters of water. That's 185 billion gallons. Enough water to fill 280,000 Olympic swimming pools. The reservoir was so massive you couldn't see across it on a clear day. Below the dam in the Ru River Valley, approximately 230,000 people lived in villages and small cities, farmers tending rice paddies, families in homes that had stood for generations, children attending schools. All of them living directly in the flood path, reassured by government propaganda that the Iron Dam made them completely safe. What those villagers didn't know was that the dam had problems from the moment it was built. During construction in 1952, Chen Xing, the chief hydrologist, warned that the design was fundamentally flawed. The reservoir needed 12 sluice gates to release water during heavy storms. The engineers built 5. Chen warned that this was catastrophically insufficient and that the dam would fail during a major typhoon. He was removed from the project and denounced as a right-wing opportunist who opposed communist progress. The dam was completed exactly as the Communist Party officials wanted, not as the engineers recommended. For 23 years, the warnings continued. In 1954, silt buildup reduced the reservoir's capacity by 11%. In 1967, a minor typhoon nearly caused failure. Officials responded by raising the dam's height, but they didn't add the additional sluice gates Chen had demanded. In 1974, engineers discovered cracks in the dam's foundation. Local officials reported this to provincial authorities with urgent requests for repairs. The request was denied. Repairs were too expensive, and admitting the dam had structural problems would embarrass the party officials who had approved the original design. Workers were ordered to fill the cracks with concrete and say nothing more. Meanwhile, something catastrophic was approaching. On August 5, 1975, Typhoon Nina formed in the Pacific Ocean. It was a Category 4 super typhoon, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded. It made landfall in Taiwan, weakened slightly, then tracked directly toward Henan province. Weather forecasters tracked its path and calculated it would hit the Banqiao Reservoir within 48 hours. They immediately sent warnings to dam officials. The warnings were explicit. The typhoon would bring unprecedented rainfall. The reservoir would exceed capacity. All upstream dams needed to begin emergency releases immediately to lower water levels before the storm arrived. But there was a problem. If Banqiao began emergency releases, it would flood farmland during harvest season, destroying crops worth millions of yuan. It would also flood a major railway line, and most importantly, it would flood a military facility downstream that manufactured chemical weapons, a facility whose existence was classified at the highest level. The local Communist Party secretary, a man named Jin Zhonghua, faced a choice: release water and destroy valuable assets, or hold the water and trust the iron dam to handle the storm. He chose to hold the water. He ordered the sluice gates to remain closed. He didn't evacuate the downstream villages because evacuation would reveal there was danger, and revealing danger would reveal the dam wasn't actually indestructible. On August 8th, at approximately 1 a.m., Typhoon Nina hit Henan province. In the next 6 hours, it would drop 41.1 inches of rain. That's an entire year's rainfall in one night. The iron dam was about to become a weapon of mass murder. At 1:15 a.m. on August 8th, water in the Banqiao reservoir began overtopping the dam, not flowing through the sluice gates, overtopping. Water flowing over the crest of the dam itself, which should be impossible in a properly designed dam. Engineers stationed at the dam immediately sent distress signals requesting permission to begin emergency releases through all 5 sluice gates. Permission denied. Officials ordered them to protect the military facility downstream at all costs. By 2:30 a.m., water was pouring over the dam at a rate that was eroding the downstream face. Engineers sent another desperate message: the dam will fail completely within hours. They needed authorization to blow the sluice gates with explosives to release pressure. They needed immediate evacuation orders for downstream villages. No response. Phone lines to provincial offices were down due to the storm. The engineers were on their own. At 1 a.m., a brave engineer named Zhang Xingguang did something that could have got him executed for treason. He bypassed the authorization chain and personally telephoned the military commander of the chemical weapons facility, warning him of imminent dam failure. The commander immediately began evacuating his facility, but he didn't warn the civilian population. Orders were orders. The facility was classified. Warning civilians would reveal its existence. At approximately 1:47 a.m., the Banqiao Dam failed catastrophically. The initial breach was about 40 feet wide. Within seconds, it expanded to nearly 400 feet. Water exploded through the gap with a force calculated at 30,000 cubic meters per second. That's 792 million gallons per minute. The wall of water was 20 feet high and moving at 31 miles per hour. A farmer named Li Xiangyun, who survived on high ground, described what he saw. "I heard a sound like the sky was cracking open. Not thunder, something deeper, more terrifying. Then I saw the wall coming. It was glowing white in the darkness because of all the foam. It sounded like 10,000 trains. The ground shook like an earthquake. I watched it hit the first village." The village just vanished. 1 second there were buildings and lights. The next second there was only water and darkness. The flood wave hit the village of Banqiao town within 7 minutes. Population, 17,000 people. Survival rate, approximately 3%. Most died in their sleep, drowned in their beds before they could react. Those who woke up had nowhere to run. The water filled entire valleys within seconds, but Banqiao was just the first domino. The flood wave continued downstream and slammed into the Shimantan Dam, another major dam in the same river system. Shimantan failed within minutes. Its reservoir added another 600 million cubic meters of water to the flood. Then it hit another dam, then another. In total, 62 dams failed in cascade within 6 hours, each one adding more water to the catastrophic flood. By the time the sun rose on August 8th, an area of approximately 4,600 square miles was underwater. That's an area larger than the entire country of Lebanon, completely submerged. Cities were erased, roads dissolved, railways were buried under mud and debris. Communication infrastructure was destroyed across half of Henan province. Survivors described bodies everywhere, hanging in trees, buried in mud, floating in the floodwater that refused to recede for weeks. Entire families wiped out with no survivors to identify them. Villages where not a single person survived to tell what happened. The Chinese government's immediate response wasn't rescue. It was a media blackout. Journalists were banned from the region. Foreign reporters were told nothing unusual had occurred. Military units were ordered to shoot anyone attempting to photograph the devastation. The disaster was classified as a state secret at the highest level, and then they lied about the death toll. Officially, the government claimed that 26,000 people died. The real number would remain hidden for decades. Stop and think about that number for a moment. 26,000. That's what they admitted to. That's the number they were comfortable announcing to the world, because they knew the real number was so catastrophic that revealing it would destroy the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. Take a second and search for Banqiao Dam failure on Google Images. Notice something. Almost no contemporary photographs exist. The few images you'll find are satellite photos from years later or government-approved pictures from decades after. There are no photos of the actual disaster, no photos of the rescue efforts, no photos of the bodies or the devastation. They seized every camera. They confiscated every photograph. They hunted down anyone who had documented the disaster and destroyed the evidence. One of the most catastrophic disasters in human history, and almost no visual record exists because the Chinese government systematically erased it. Now here's what's terrifying. This wasn't ancient history. This was 1975, the same year Saturday Night Live premiered. The same year Microsoft was founded. The same year Vietnam fell. This happened in the modern era, and they successfully hid it from the world. But what I'm about to tell you about the real death toll will make you understand why they tried so hard to keep it secret. Because 26,000 was barely 10% of the truth. The immediate deaths from drowning were just the beginning. As the floodwater receded over the following weeks, a secondary disaster emerged that was possibly worse than the flood itself. The water destroyed every water treatment facility, every sewer system, every well in the region. 4 million people were left without access to clean water. Remember, this was 1975 in rural China. No bottled water, no emergency supplies. No infrastructure to deliver aid quickly. Within days, outbreaks began. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, diseases that spread through contaminated water killed people by the thousands. Entire refugee camps were wiped out by epidemics. Doctors working in the aftermath described conditions they compared to medieval plagues. But it got worse. The floods destroyed crops across Henan province during harvest season. 4 million people who had survived the flood now faced starvation. The Chinese government, already dealing with nationwide food shortages, couldn't or wouldn't provide adequate emergency supplies. Famine killed tens of thousands more over the following year. Chen Yuyan survived the flood. She was 11 years old, living in a village that was partially destroyed. In an interview conducted in 2005, after the government finally allowed victims to speak publicly, she described the months after. We had no food. We ate tree bark. We ate grass. My younger brother died from eating poisonous plants because he was so hungry he didn't care. My mother died from cholera 3 weeks after the flood. We couldn't even bury her properly because the ground was still waterlogged. We just left her body in a field and walked away. There were bodies everywhere. Nobody could keep up with burying them. The actual death toll from the Banqiao Dam failure remained a state secret until 1989, 14 years later. When an independent investigation finally compiled records from hospitals, villages, and refugee camps, they reached a staggering conclusion. Approximately 85,600 people died immediately from drowning. Another 145,000 died in the following weeks and months from disease, starvation, and complications. Total death toll, 230,000 people, from a single infrastructure failure that engineers had predicted and officials had ignored. That makes the Banqiao Dam failure the deadliest disaster in human history, surpassing famines, earthquakes, and tsunamis. And it was entirely preventable. If they had built the 12 sluice gates originally recommended, the dam would have held. If they had made the repairs recommended in 1974, the dam would have held. If they had authorized emergency releases when the typhoon warnings came, the dam would have held. If they had evacuated downstream populations when overflow began, 200,000 lives would have been saved. But every single decision, every corner cut, every warning ignored, every safety measure rejected, was made to save money or avoid political embarrassment. And here's the truly horrifying part. 11 million people lost their homes. 5 million lost all their possessions. The economic damage was estimated at approximately $1.2 billion in 1975 currency, about $6 billion today. The Chinese government eventually paid compensation of approximately $50 per survivor, not per death, per survivor. If your entire family died, you got $50. The engineer who had warned about the design flaws in 1952, Chen Xing, lived to see the disaster. He died in 2004, having spent 29 years knowing he was right and watching the government that silenced him try to erase the evidence of 230,000 deaths. His final interview, recorded shortly before his death, consisted of 5 words: "They should have listened to me." The Chinese government's cover-up of Banqiao was systematic, sophisticated, and terrifyingly effective. Within days of the disaster, military units established a complete lockdown of Henan province. Nobody was allowed in or out without military authorization. Journalists who tried to reach the area were arrested. Foreign reporters were told the region was closed due to flood damage to infrastructure, technically true but wildly misleading. The government controlled all information about the disaster. State media reported significant flooding in Henan province, with casualty figures of approximately 26,000. They attributed the disaster entirely to Typhoon Nina, a natural disaster, conveniently omitting that 62 dams failed due to poor design and negligent operation. Survivors were forbidden from discussing what happened. Chen Yuyan, the 11-year-old survivor I mentioned earlier, said, "Soldiers came to our refugee camp and told us we must never speak about how many died. They said it would dishonor the memory of the dead to spread rumors. They said anyone caught exaggerating the disaster would be arrested for spreading anti-state propaganda. We were terrified. We stayed silent." The government hunted down every photograph, every piece of film, every written account. Families who kept diaries describing the disaster had them confiscated during routine inspections. Cameras were searched, film was destroyed. Official photographers who had documented the damage found their work classified and locked away. To this day, almost no contemporary photographs of the Banqiao disaster exist in public archives. International organizations tried to investigate. The United Nations requested access to provide humanitarian aid and document the disaster for future dam safety protocols. China refused. The World Bank asked for engineering reports to understand what went wrong. China refused. American intelligence agencies detected the disaster through satellite imagery and offered assistance. China denied anything unusual had happened. The cover-up wasn't just about hiding incompetence. It was about protecting a political system that couldn't admit failure. The dam had been built as a symbol of Communist Party triumph over nature. Admitting it failed due to poor design and negligent operation would undermine the party's legitimacy. Admitting that party officials prioritized protecting a military facility over civilian lives would reveal the true nature of the regime's priorities. So they lied, and they kept lying for 14 years. When the truth finally emerged in 1989, it was only because political reforms under Deng Xiaoping allowed limited criticism of past government failures. Even then, the Chinese government never officially acknowledged the full death toll. The number 230,000 comes from independent research compiled by Chinese historians and international investigators, not from government records. Nobody was prosecuted, not the party secretary who ordered the sluice gates kept closed, not the officials who denied repair requests, not the administrators who failed to order evacuations. The closest thing to accountability was a government report that blamed the disaster on insufficient understanding of extreme weather events and limitations of engineering knowledge at the time. Both were lies. They understood the risk perfectly. Engineers had warned them repeatedly. They simply chose to ignore those warnings because safety was expensive and politically inconvenient. The survivors' legal battle for compensation lasted 33 years. The initial $50 payment in 1976 was increased to approximately $300 per survivor in 2005, then to $1,000 in 2008. For comparison, the Chinese government spent approximately $400 million building the replacement dam system, money they could have spent on proper design and maintenance of the original dam. Families of victims who lost everyone received nothing. No death certificates were issued for most victims because officially acknowledging the deaths would require acknowledging the scope of the disaster. To this day, thousands of victims remain unidentified and unacknowledged. In 2012, a documentary filmmaker tried to create a film about Banqiao. The Chinese government banned it. The footage he'd collected was confiscated. He was told the disaster was still classified as sensitive historical information that could be used to undermine social stability. Translation: the truth is still too damning to allow. September 19, 1985, Mexico City. An 8.0 magnitude earthquake struck at 7:19 a.m. Buildings across the city collapsed, but one type of building collapsed in disproportionately horrific numbers: hospitals. 29 hospitals and health centers collapsed completely. The death toll at Hospital Juarez alone was between 500 and 1,000, mostly patients trapped in their beds. Why? Because contractors had bribed building inspectors to approve hospitals that didn't meet earthquake codes. Every concrete pillar was filled with newspaper and styrofoam instead of proper rebar. The contractors saved approximately 40% on construction costs. Engineers who raised concerns were fired. Government building inspectors were paid to look the other way. Total death toll, approximately 10,000 people, with a third dying in buildings that should never have been certified as safe. April 24, 2013, Dhaka, Bangladesh. The Rana Plaza building, an 8-story garment factory, collapsed in 90 seconds. 1,134 people died. 2,500 were injured. The building had been designed as a shopping mall, rated for 5 stories. The owner illegally added 3 floors to house garment factories with heavy machinery that exceeded weight limits. Cracks appeared in the building on April 23. Inspectors told the owner to evacuate and ordered the building closed. The owner, Sohel Rana, told workers they'd be fired if they didn't report the next day. Workers needed the money. They reported. The building collapsed the next morning during morning shift. Security camera footage shows the exact moment. workers at sewing machines suddenly looking up as the ceiling begins to crack. Then the camera goes dark as tons of concrete crush everything below. Sohail Rana was arrested trying to flee to India. He was convicted of murder in 2023 and sentenced to 30 years. He's the rare exception, an owner who actually faced consequences. June 3, 2017, London, United Kingdom. Grenfell Tower, a 24-story apartment building, caught fire at 12:54 a.m. 72 people died, most from smoke inhalation as they followed official advice to stay put in their apartments while fire consumed the building. The fire spread rapidly because the building had been refurbished with flammable cladding, a material banned for high-rise buildings in most countries. Why was it used? Because it was cheaper. Fire-resistant cladding would have cost approximately £5,000 more. To save £5,000 on a multi-million-pound renovation, they installed cladding that turned the building into a vertical chimney. Residents had been complaining about fire safety for years. Their complaints were ignored. After the fire, it was discovered that approximately 300 similar buildings across the UK had the same dangerous cladding. As of 2025, many still haven't been fixed because building owners claim it's too expensive. November 5, 2015, Bento Rodrigues, Brazil. The Fundão Dam, holding iron ore mining waste, failed catastrophically. 62 million cubic meters of toxic sludge buried the village in minutes. 19 people died. The sludge traveled 400 miles downstream, contaminating water supplies for millions. The dam owner, Samarco, had been warned by engineers that the dam was overfilled and structurally unsound. They continued operations anyway. Samarco was co-owned by Vale and BHP Billiton, two of the world's largest mining companies. Neither CEO faced criminal charges. The companies paid a settlement equal to approximately 1 month's profit. Every single one of these disasters follows the exact same pattern. Engineers identify risks. They issue warnings. They recommend fixes. Their recommendations are rejected because safety costs money. Officials calculate that potential lawsuits and settlements will cost less than implementing proper safety measures. They proceed with inadequate safety systems. Disaster occurs exactly as predicted. Initial death toll is deliberately understated. Evidence is suppressed or destroyed. When the truth emerges, officials blame unforeseen circumstances or acts of God. Nobody is prosecuted, or if they are, they receive sentences that are laughable compared to the lives destroyed. This isn't incompetence. It's not ignorance. It's a calculated business decision made by people who understand risk assessment perfectly and decide that your death is an acceptable cost of doing business. At Banqiao, officials calculated that flooding a military facility was more expensive than the lives of 230,000 civilians. At Rana Plaza, the owner calculated that lost production from evacuation was more expensive than workers' lives. At Grenfell, contractors calculated that £5,000 was more valuable than the lives of 72 residents. At Fundão, mining executives calculated that shutting down production to fix the dam was more expensive than potential settlements from dam failure. They're not making mistakes, they're making spreadsheets. Your life has a dollar value in their risk assessment models. When the cost of safety exceeds the dollar value of your life multiplied by the probability of disaster, safety becomes irrational from a profit-maximizing perspective. And here's the truly terrifying part. These disasters keep happening at the same rate. We haven't learned. We haven't changed the incentive structure. Right now today, there are dams, buildings, bridges, and facilities operating with known safety defects because fixing them costs more than expected settlements. Right now, regulators are accepting bribes to approve buildings that don't meet code. Right now, executives are reading engineering reports warning of catastrophic failure and filing them away unread because addressing the problems would impact quarterly profits. The next Banqiao is already built. We just don't know where it is yet. Now you know why these disasters aren't in your history textbooks. Not because they're not significant. Banqiao alone killed more people than most wars, but because the pattern they reveal is too damning. They show that governments and corporations routinely choose profit over human life, and that they face almost no consequences for doing so. You can look up building safety violations in your area. Most countries maintain public databases. You can research the history of infrastructure near your home. Dams, bridges, and buildings have inspection records. You can demand transparency from your elected officials about infrastructure safety funding. Which of these disasters shocked you most? Let me know in the comments. And if this made you angry, good. Anger is the appropriate response to learning that your life has been reduced to a line item in someone's cost-benefit analysis. Subscribe if you want more investigations into the disasters they tried to hide. Remember, every disaster you just learned about was predicted. Engineers knew, officials knew. They just decided you weren't worth saving. They were wrong.